So what's up, guys? I'm Taylor. I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. For those of you that aren't familiar with me, I'm able to hunt over 200 days a year. My season actually runs year-round. I'm really fortunate that we have a very overpopulated whitetail herd where I live, and I get to help thin them out with a bow and arrow. So, like I said, a normal year would consist of well over 200 hunts, anywhere from 200 to 225 days, depending on weather. I'll hunt in pretty much anything other than like really heavy thunderstorms or gnarly, snow, sleet, dangerous conditions. But I run anywhere from like a 30 to 40% success rate in those hunts. So, you can do the numbers on that, but I put a lot of carbon in the air. I put a lot of meat in the freezer and feed a lot of homeless people. So that, works well for testing gear, but that also really helps me really get a good feeling of looking at deer body language, trying to figure out how to read deer, figure out where deer are going to be. And I don't like to waste my time in the woods. So if I'm going in on a hunt, I'm going to be trying to harvest something on that hunt. So just along the way, I'm really anal and analytical, and I just started trying to get better and better and better at harvesting deer, and have gotten pretty successful at that. So my background, I don't have any like hunters in my family. I taught myself how to hunt. I just really wanted to learn how to hunt when I was in college, and started going out into the woods and teaching myself how to hunt. There was a lot of trial and error, and I was pretty much a sponge and read every single book, magazine article, TV show, you name it. I was trying to watch it and learn from it and try to put another tool in my arsenal. Along the way, I started really analyzing topography and trying to figure out, why are deer going to be in a certain spot, or how can I increase my odds for seeing deer, getting close to deer, and then eventually getting an arrow through a deer. Just my kind of nature, that led me down the path of building my own bows, arrows, tuning. I mean, really trying to maximize the efficiency of every part of my kit, part of my system, and just getting better at hunting. So I'm pretty successful, whether it be in the middle of farm country or in the middle of the mountains or in people's backyards and everything in between. So hopefully we can all kind of have a good open discussion, and anything you guys need, talking on or want some details on, or anything I can help. That's really kind of my big thing, is I want to try and just help anyone any way I can, because the learning curve for me sucked. And if I can help cut that learning curve down for anybody out there, then I'm considering that a success.
So I have a question about the learning curve aspect that you were talking about. I've used to hunt when I was younger, all going through college, had two kids, athletics and all that made it really hard to get back out into the woods. Now the kids are actually getting into it. And so I have teenage daughter and son. And how would I lessen the learning curve for those kids? Any suggestions to keep them motivated, understanding that there's numerous days where you don't see anything or don't get a shot? Looking for some ideas to keep them motivated to go out there and keep using their bow every day and keep interested in the sport.
Yeah, that's a great question. Where do you live?
Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. So you guys are allowed to bait in Ohio, is that right?
We are.
Yeah. So it's funny, one of my brothers, I have triplet brothers that are younger than I am, and one of them came to me when they were in college, and they asked me to take them hunting. And when I graduated from college and came back to Northern Virginia where I live, the only day I could hunt were Saturdays. At the time, Sunday hunting was illegal. And so I would go out like an hour before sunrise. I'd climb up in my climber somewhere, and I would sit there all day. So hunting all day was nothing for me, regardless of what time of year it was. My brother asked me to take him hunting, and I took him out, and we were going to sit all day. And he was so bored, he slept all day. He thought hunting was the worst thing ever, and he's never gone again. And so it taught me that, hey, just because I'm super into this doesn't mean that they're going to be as well. So I think that in order to keep them interested, first I would make archery as fun as possible. So shooting in the backyard, if you can put some balloons on a target, have them pop the balloons, kind of escalate, shooting being fun, and then go from there. I would take them out and maybe take them out scouting, make scouting fun, try to see deer, and then really focus on when you take them out, I'd try to put them in a big cushy ladder stand. If you have access to private ground where you can find deer, or less pressured animals, I would try and get them, maybe on an evening hunt over a big corn pile kind of thing, to just get them seeing deer, get them excited about the process. Because the worst thing, or the hardest kind of hurdle to overcome, is lighting that fire. And so if they're just going out and they associate hunting with being cold and bored, it's going to be hard to kind of to light that fire and jump over the hurdle. But if you're able to kind of get out and see some deer and, keep the comfort there. So, get them interested in shooting. And then from there, get them interested in kind of woodsmanship or scouting and kind of walking around, and then make sure that when you do go out, they're comfortable and that they're kind of determining the time frame that they're out there, would be my tips. So
Thank you.
I hope that helps, man. I have a daughter who is 2, who loves looking at deer from the car when she rides around with dad. And I have another daughter on the way. So I hope that I'm in your position here in a couple of years. So
well, I'm fortunate. Both kids love to shoot. It's just a matter of getting the animal in front of them right now is what I'm.
Well, that's the hardest thing too, because you don't want to necessarily make it too easy to where they don't appreciate the harvest or the hunt.
Exactly. Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to just make them sit out there and freeze and not see anything. So it's definitely difficult. But I would try to focus on their comfort and let them really kind of enjoy the pursuit of the game. And if you can learn anything, don't take your brother out after he's been out for a night of drinking and just watch him sleep on the ground in your coveralls all day.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure thing.
Tony, I live north of Detroit a little bit, so been out a couple seasons with my bow. Never actually saw a deer, or at least one that didn't run off. But with the 30 to 40% success rate that you have, what are you doing when you're walking out, and what kind of locations and trees are you really looking for a tree stand and those types of areas that enable you to be so successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the primary area that I'm hunting is a backyard. So, I'm hunting more of a nuisance species, a very overpopulated species. I'm trying to find generally a travel corridor or a pinch point that is really close to somewhere that they have to be. So those are bedding areas and feeding areas. Feeding areas tend to change based on the food source, or maybe there might be some pressure that you're unaware of in the area. Bedding areas, the deer are always going to be in. So I like to focus closest to bedding areas. However, the reason a deer is bedding in that certain spot is because it is the safest area they can find in that whole place, right? So if you're targeting does, which is what I'm targeting all the time, I'm looking for, the bedding, which is going to be a thick spot for the most part, near a food source. So early season, you can find white oaks. That's probably going to be your predominant food source north of Detroit. I know it is here in the Mid-Atlantic. So I'm looking for the white oaks that are dropping, and then I'm constantly scouting to try and find those deer. It's really important to note the most important thing that I'm focused on is my access, because deer are not dumb, and they're going to figure out where you're coming into a property from and where you're setting up. So I'm always trying to scout and stay one step ahead of the curve by figuring out where those deer are bedding, and then what they can see from those beds. I mean, literally, if I'm going into a property and I blow deer out, I will go find where they were bedded, and I will get down in that bed and I will look out and see what they can see. And it is, I mean, no BS. It is unbelievable what difference 5 yards makes even. I mean, and I'll know, okay, I can get in to this tree here, but I can't go any further because they're going to spot me. And that to me has been the most important. So finding your access points and finding those areas tight to bedding have always been really helpful. And those bedding locations are also wind-based. So you need to kind of focus on, I'm always asking the question why. If you ask the question why enough, you're going to get to the answer as to why the deer are there, right? And so, what's their food source? Why are they bedding here? What's the wind direction? What's the cover? You start answering those questions and figuring it out, and the next time that those, that the weather or the wind or all those different circumstances, recreate that situation, those deer will be there, and you'll put carbon in the air for sure.
That's good. I appreciate that.
Do you have a lot of topography in your area, like
yeah,
draws?
And that might be my follow-up question is when I'm trying to choose a tree, I'm deciding whether or not skying myself really applies, because it's like a lot of ravines are where I want to look down and hang out, but at the same time I'm afraid of that angle if I'm skying myself or if the forest behind me is good enough.
For sure. And as a kind of a general rule of thumb, if you're hunting in hill country or steeper terrains, you'll find that pretty much always a third of the way down from the top on a hill, on the leeward side of the hill, so the area that the wind is blowing over. So like, let's say my hand is a ridge top, right? And the wind's coming this way across. Third of the way down, right here, you'll see a trail almost always. The deer run that because there's what creates it's called a thermal hub or a thermal tunnel, that as the wind's coming across, thermal's coming up will pull that wind around and allows the deer to smell what's below them and what's on the other side. So it maximizes their efficiency of their strongest suit, which is their nose. So that's a really good spot to find deer travel in. The deer will tend to bed on those points. So if you kind of get closer to the point of a ridge, are you familiar with what a point is? Kind of where, obviously, yeah. So they'll bed out on the points because that maximizes their ability to hop around depending on different winds. So if you can kind of get an access that would come in, get on that leeward side close to a point, they're going to end up walking out of that bed. That would be for an evening hunt. Morning hunt, sometimes you have to figure out which way the deer are going to access that bed. The rule of thumb is that they kind of access it from the bottom, but that's not always the case, I've found. So, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, definitely worry about skylining yourself. You want to try and reduce any potential silhouetting of your body that you can. I look for trees that have good back cover to them that help break up my outline. I hunt out of a tree saddle, so I'm on the back side of the tree as opposed to the front of it, but I'm still always looking for something that's breaking up my outline. And my dog wants to say hi also. Hey, bud. So looking for something that's going to break up my outline and allow me to kind of cover up in that tree.
Gotcha.
So Mike, I have two questions, or a question about two different pieces of gear. One is release. So I've always shot a trigger release, but here recently I've really been kind of contemplating of switching over to a thumb release. I definitely, at least for target shooting, I definitely see a lot of big benefits for going to the thumb release, but I have hesitation when it comes to going into the field of which one would be more optimal. I don't think, at least for me, I don't think that I'm one that I should practice one and then hunt with the other. Whichever one I'm going to go with, I need to stick with that and always utilize that one and maintain that consistency. So my question for you is, if you utilize both, which one do you prefer and why? And then my other question is about sights, single pin versus multi-pin sight in the field. I always shot multi-pin until this past season. I switched to a single pin. I definitely like some aspects of it. I like being able to range and get my pin set to that specific range, but at the same time, that animal's constantly moving, and every time if he makes any kind of significant movement, you're making a lot more movement and bringing your bow back down, readjusting the pin, if you're trying to stay with him. So I was curious on size, which way are you doing there, single pin, multi-pin, and why?
So first off, on the thumb release, I shoot a thumb release. I also I shoot a lot with a hinge. I will hunt with my hinge also, just because I practice a ton. I would not recommend hunting with a hinge unless you've really practiced a lot with it, to make sure you're not going to punch yourself in the face and that shot breaks clearly. I really think there are a lot of advantages to hunting with the thumb release over hunting with a wrist strap. Primarily, I like having that thumb release in my pocket and keeping it there and not having it hanging from my wrist, kind of banging stuff around. So that to me is a really big plus. I don't ever want metal on metal contact anywhere in the woods. That's a very unnatural noise, and it's just not something that deer will hear and tolerate. I don't care if they're in the middle of Washington, D.C. or in the middle of Missouri or Iowa or anywhere in between. They're going to be gone. So for a thumb release, the biggest thing that people tend to have difficulty with is getting that anchor point and finding a consistent anchor point. When you're using a wrist release, it's easy to kind of come down the center of your face. I know some guys that even still are old school and they lock their thumb in behind their neck. I'm not a fan of any of those. If you are going to use a wrist release, I would recommend coming down kind of below your jawline and getting locked in there, or at least with your thumb coming in below your jawline. But when you're shooting that thumb button, you make a V with your fingers here. You run that V down your jawline and have it stop. It's important that you kind of will lock in right where your nose is able to touch on the string, and then just kind of focus on breaking that, not by punching the trigger, but by actually pulling into it. Or there are a couple different methods that people like to use for breaking a thumb release. I personally like to pull into it, although sometimes I'll kind of focus on pulling into my offhand here, which will make the shot break. So for me, I played golf in college. I did a lot of work with our sports psychologist, because Lord knows I need it. No, but when I had high pressure putts, it always was helpful for me to kind of feel something in my hands. So I like having a little motion going in my hand to make that shot break, as opposed to just pulling on it, because that for me just doesn't work as well. So yeah, I definitely would recommend kind of make sure that your D-loop is the proper length and that your bow draw length is right, and then really get that thumb release fitted. But I would practice the hell out of it this summer and get ready to hunt with it coming into September, because I truly think that there are a lot of advantages to a thumb release, and I don't really see any downsides to it, because unlike a hinge, you're able to have the shot break exactly when you want it to. Right. And technically a hinge will break when you need it to as well, if you do it properly, but under some heavy stress, it's a little different.
Yeah,
on the single,
to make that switch a lot, because I know I've got my draw length's gonna have to get adjusted, because I think my draw length, it's set up right now a little bit too short, because when I have shot a thumb release, my hand is not back along my jawline like it needs to be, and my nose is not in the proper spot. So I either got to change its cams or adjust that D-loop. And I think it's gonna have to be a cam change to get the bulk of it up and fine tune.
Yeah, you're better off getting the cams right, getting the bow right. Go through the tuning process of it and make sure it's super dialed, because at the end of the day, it'll really benefit your hunting. Plus, if you're going to a longer draw length, you'll get a little more speed, and you'll just be way more accurate once you get to that proper, T fit of the bow. A really good drill is to just if you stand up close to a wall and make a T, and then bring your arm in and just walk your body to a wall like you're doing a peck fly, and just turn your head to the wall and measure from the outside of your fist to the corner of your mouth. That'll tell you exactly what your draw length should be. And just as long as you're not, it's real important that you're not cheating, kind of trying to get your face down or standing up, leaning back. But if you keep, your hips dead in line with your shoulders and get a real good T and just measure from the wall to the corner of your lip, that'll tell you exactly what your draw length should be.
And you're going from, you said make a fist and go from the knuckles, so not going from the fingertip.
Correct, yeah. So you would literally stand up and just walk to the wall. Make sure you keep that perfect T-frame there. And that'll tell you exactly what your draw length should be. It's amazing how many guys don't have the proper draw length on their bow. A lot of guys that like good friends that have hunted their entire life, just went into a bow shop one day and they drew the bow back with the arrow on it, and they might have had their hips way out or whatever, and the draw length is just way off. But like anything else, if it's not fit from the beginning, it's going to be hard to get the maximum accuracy out of it the entire time. Your second question about the single pin versus the multi pin, where are you hunting?
Most of my stuff's in Texas.
Okay, so like, what's the furthest shot you're taking with a bow?
My furthest comfort level right now is probably about 40, 45.
Okay, so for me here where I am, I won't shoot over 20 yards in the backyards just because I can't risk not hitting anything other than a dead 12 ring perfect shot, because the difference in a deer expiring in 30 yards and 75 yards could be the difference in me paying to have a pool cleaned again or not. So that's a big deal. But I find that where I'm hunting in the mountains or when we're out, somewhere in the Midwest hunting, I still rarely have a shot over like 30, 35 yards, just based on the kind of the terrain and how thick it is or whatever. So much like throwing a football or a baseball, I will practice with the pin set. I hunt with a single pin sight, and I will practice with the sight set at 25 yards, and I'll know, okay, where's this pin hitting at 20? Where's it hitting at 30? Where's it hitting at 40, kind of thing. And so I can instinctively draw the bow, hold it over, and let it rip at 40 yards, 42 yards with the pin on 25 and just hit the X. So much like anything else, if you practice with it and get comfortable with it, it's amazing how easy you can shoot without needing any other reference points. And what I'll do is if I'm looking at the sight post on the sight, and it's set at 25 yards, well, maybe halfway down will be 35 yards, and then the bubble will be 45 or something like that. And I tend to rotate through a handful of bows throughout the year. So I'll have like 4 or 5 down here in my man cave, which is where I'm filming you guys from. And so like back here on my bow press, I got one bow on there right now, but what I'll do is I'll put a piece of tape on the riser and I'll just mark where my hold-offs are, just like a rifle, kind of like quick dope of a rifle, just so I know at full draw, because the different bows that I have different IBO speeds, and some of them might be, halfway down the post will be 30 yards, some will be 35, whatever. So I'll just put that on there for quick reference, so I don't, get a deer of a lifetime at 37 yards and shoot one right under his brisket, kind of thing. But I've never had that be a problem. I've taken lots and lots of deer not having the pin dialed to the number that I need it to be. And I've never had a marginal shot based on the pin. I've made marginal shots myself, but that was for, me doing something dumb or canting the bow or whatever. So, if you're shooting a single pin, I have faith that you will be kind of so concerned to not be prepared that you'll be fine in it. It's the guys that will just only shoot it with it dialed to whatever number that they ranged at, and sometimes you don't have that time in the field. Now, that being said, if you have a deer of a lifetime at 50 yards and he's moving so quickly that you don't have time to adjust your sight, you might not, maybe you shouldn't be putting carbon in the air at a distance like that, So that's always kind of how I looked at it. But if I have a booner get out of range on me quickly, I might change my opinion on that one day. But that's always just been kind of how I thought about it.
All right. Appreciate it.
What do you do in terms of like scouting? Is it anything you do specifically to maximize, early season archery as opposed to, for like here when the firearm season runs around? When are you backing out of the woods? When do you kind of let it be? What's like that cutoff point? What are you doing to kind of maximize, archery season?
Yeah, that's a great question. So archery season for me runs year round. So I'll hunt a little bit with a firearm, but I have to travel a good ways to hunt with a firearm. So for me, everything around my house, I have over 1,000 trees that I can climb within a 15-minute drive of my house. So I have more than ample hunting opportunities. What I'll do is I'll always talk to the homeowners and try to figure out, again, where I'm hunting is kind of an anomaly in the fact that these people can see their whole property, so they can be my eyes when I'm not there. So I tell them all the time, let me know when you're seeing deer, because they have no reason to be dishonest with me. They want the deer gone. So they'll be like, hey, the last couple of days, the deer have been by the koi pond every night at 7:30. Well, sure as hell, the deer are going to be by the koi pond tomorrow night at 7:30, unless you bump them out or something. So my kind of standard operating procedure, let's say, for example, this is a property that's a little bigger than what a homeowner could tell me is seeing in the backyard, because that's kind of pretty simple. So what I'll do is I'll go into an area that I had permission on. I'll find out where they're seeing deer, and since in this example it's not where they can see deer, I'll scout it. I'll look for a deer sign. I'll pick out a couple spots that I think are optimal. Now I'm using that based on the sign, the trees around, all the different browse options, and forage, and also scat, beds, rubs, whatever. I'll pick the tree that I think has the highest probability of shooting those areas that's the closest to my access. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just going to mark a tree, and then I'm going to climb up it and cut shooting lanes and just make sure that everything, when I come to hunt, is going to be perfect. And the reason I'm picking that tree that's closest to my access point is, why go past a potential tree that if you don't know, what's going on in this property, to maybe screw up a hunt. So I'll then put a camera out. I utilize a lot of cell cameras, and I'll kind of monitor that camera for movement. I'd say about 60% of the time, my initial guess is pretty good. It might not be the perfect tree, but odds are I can probably shoot something from that tree. When I see movement on that camera, I'm going in when I see movement on that camera, I'm starting to look at wind direction, temperature, other things that are potentially happening. Like, again, asking the question, why? Why are the deer here? Why are they doing what they're doing? What direction are they coming from? How does that correlate with the wind direction? If it was one property I have is by a local high school. Well, on Friday nights, I was seeing a ton of deer. Well, it's because all the football traffic is coming in and was pushing the deer out of a certain spot. I could only hunt that property on Friday evenings in the fall, or Saturday mornings when they were coming back trying to get to their normal spot. Any other day of the week, it was a bust. It took me like a month to figure that out, which is kind of sad in its own right because it's a pretty easy thing to put two and two together. But I'm trying to ask the question why are there deer there. As soon as those conditions recreate themselves, I'm going out there to hunt. In the event that I didn't pick the right spot, I might go to that tree and hunt it and try to do an observation sit and see what's going on. But between cell cameras and then, I hunt a ton of spots around my house. So on a night like tonight, I picked up my daughter from daycare and we just drove around looking for deer. And so I have, folders in my notes section on my phone that are just riddled with different properties, different notes, why deer are where they are. And then depending on the season, as far as like what stage the deer are in, season of the year, I will hunt deer accordingly. So early season, I'm just always looking for food. Later in the year, I'm going to start looking for kind of pinch points or travel corridors where those deer are getting pushed through as the bucks are rutting. And then later in the year, I'm looking for kind of thermal cover, food, and what's going to keep them warm. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was curious. It's kind of more of a deer management question. What best strategies, tactics to draw and keep deer on a property? If you're hunting private property or you own the property or it's leased property, how to increase the deer herd in the area that you're hunting.
What area are you hunting in right now?
I hunt Southwest Ohio and Kentucky.
So, I don't have the opportunity to do a ton of land management on the spots that I hunt. I have one or two spots where I'm able to like plant food plots and do some habitat manipulation in order to hold deer or make it more efficient for me to kind of hunt them in their spots. So I've found that creating bedding cover is the absolute best thing possible. So hinge cutting or just creating spots for the deer to bed in, and just providing food that is different than what's all around them. So, if you're surrounded by a bunch of ag and corn and great stuff, soybeans, maybe you can plant something different that they don't have a ton of, or something that they don't compete against. My first time planting food plots, I was planting a lot of early season clover, some other items that would be traditionally early season browse, and the deer didn't care about it. And I was talking to some of the local QDMA guys from around here, and the guy was like, well, of course, man, like you're competing against white oaks, dude. You're not going to get any traction when you're competing against white oaks. You gotta figure out when they are when there's a lull in whatever they're looking for, and try and give them that option. So if you can create bedding, create good cover for them, and then give them the food that they need that is outside of the realm, I think that would be the best.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is you can always reach out to like your local QDMA chapter, and have them come out and do like a site-specific survey and give you some information as far as what they would recommend for your exact property.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Your local wildlife biologist should most likely do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
So earlier you mentioned that you spend all day in the stand, that you'll go out there and spend, sun up to sundown. What's your go-to clothing to wear? So, you get the early mornings and late evenings where you start to get cold, the afternoon where you're sweating, at least here in Ohio where it does transition temperatures through the day. So what do you go to? What's your go-to?
Yeah, it really depends on the time of year. So my main, the most important thing of everything is to not not put a ton of stuff on when you're walking in and climbing up, because you do not want to start sweating. If you're sweating on the walk in, it's game over, because it's just a matter of time before you start getting chilled out. So, for example, Kevin and I, we were hunting in Missouri this year in November, and like one morning it was -6, Kevin,
Yeah, it's
and
freezing.
And we were walking to the stand, and I was wearing just a base layer and my Solitude bibs, and I had them totally zipped down because I just did not want to start sweating. Now, I had a ton of extra layers in my pack and strapped to my pack, and so once you get up in your stand and you start to feel like you're chilling down, that's when you start adding layers, and you don't just go from zero to everything. You kind of slowly, gradually work it up. So if it's early September, I might just be wearing like a wick hoodie. That's one of my favorite go-to pieces in September, with like the obsidian pant. I've worn those things a ton. And maybe I'll throw like a sawtooth vest or the sawtooth hybrid jacket in my pack, just in case like the wind starts blowing. The Catalyst jacket and the Catalyst pant have just been absolutely a workhorse for me. I love the amount of wind blocking that it has, as well as the breathability. It's like the perfect blend as far as that goes, in my opinion, and it allows me to really layer underneath of it. So I've worn that in as warm of like 65 degrees and down to like somewhere in the 30s with different layering. But it really kind of depends on what you're comfortable in. Like, I run hot. Obviously, I have a lot of extra layers built into my body. So, I run warmer than probably Kevin does, but being the string bean that he is, and
That's right.
my wife would love that, but but no, I mean, so it really depends on like what's comfortable for you. But sweat is the enemy, man, and that's why the wool works so well. Is it gets that sweat off your body and keeps moving it away to where it helps your body regulate its temperature much faster than something that would get all clammy and not move the moisture. But so it's kind of a loaded question a little bit as far as not knowing the temperature range, but definitely bring stuff to the stand with you to put on. And I'm a huge vest fan, just because if the wind picks up or whatever, it's really easy to throw a vest on, kind of bury your hands in it, and keep your core warm. That's the most important factor.
Okay, thank you.
Your hands, your fingers and toes, if your fingers or toes get cold, man, it is game over. And a lot of people make that same mistake with boots. Like, you'll read boot reviews, people are like, especially rubber boots, you'll see like a 1,600 gram pack boot, and somebody's like, "Oh, this boot sucks. My feet were freezing." Well, it's probably because your feet were sweating just the same. And if your feet get sweated up, your socks are wet, your toes are going to freeze right away. So, I mean, like, I've brought an extra pair of socks with me to the stand that I've changed out if I'm wearing a big, thick rubber boot, just to keep my toes dry and warm. And it's amazing how well that works.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The only thing I would add to that conversation is to understand sort of your temperature range too, and then prepare on each end of that spectrum. So thinking about like extreme cold, what is your outer layer? And then extreme hot, what is sort of your base layer? And then you kind of build that system up throughout, because really you decrease your versatility as you get farther towards the extremes. It's a lot easier to obviously layer down than it is to layer up if you don't have that gear.
Yeah.
One of our go-tos that I really kind of point people towards is our Solitude kit for anything, mid to late season, just because it has such great versatility for an installation package. That's going to be your go-to, specifically when, we hunted that down to -6 degrees just to test it, just to see if we could stay in that tree. And it's with the right layering kit underneath, it's certainly a game changer. And then obviously, like if you have any more questions about gear specifically, like specific to like a certain time of year or whatever, we got plenty of people to answer those questions too. So just reach out and we'll get you set up.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. So my like entire whitetail kit, and what Kevin's speaking to is spot on. I mean, the Solitude set and the Catalyst set for me are like absolute workhorses. And then I think of kind of all the other pieces that I sprinkle in around them to kind of push them to the end of that spectrum. And then once the temperature changes, start with the other set and kind of continue pushing it. So the wick and the obsidian are great. And then the wick works well as another piece of the kit later in the season. And that's one of the things that's so cool about like all the First Lite pieces is they all work together in harmony, and they're not just like standalone, individual pieces. So the base layers are absolutely vital to everything you're doing. So the 150, 250, and 350 weights I use throughout the year. That wick hoodie, I love the fact that it has a hood on it, because that's just one less piece of gear I have to take with me to the woods. So being that I have a beard, I can just throw the 150 up and be covered. And it also helps if it's really sunny out, you won't get sunburn on your face, which is pretty nice. And then from that, as the temperatures drop a little, I'll get into that Catalyst system. I'll work in the Sawtooth vest under that with the 150, 250, and 350 weight wools. I'll kind of layer those as needed. And then once the temperature changes and gets colder, then I'll switch into that Solitude set. And we pushed it down to -6. I've worn that Solitude set into, lots of single digits and hunting with it. And it rocks. I mean, again, I run a little warmer, but everybody I know that has it is just blown away. I absolutely love that kangaroo pocket in the middle. We were talking about thumb releases earlier. I'll actually leave my thumb release in that kangaroo pocket, which is right there on my belly. Being that pocket's so close to your breastbone, it's always warm in there. It's really nice to have a warm release. I hunt with fingerless gloves, the merino fingerless, and so when I do have a deer coming in and they're working in from far away, and your hands out at 5 degrees, 7 degrees, whatever, those fingers get pretty cold pretty quickly. So it's nice to have a warm release to kind of hold on to, as opposed to one that's been sitting out getting wind whipped for 4 or 5 hours. Something else that is a little pro tip, I like to take my hand warmer that's sitting in there. If I do see a deer working in that's kind of slowly feeding in, I'll hold it in my bow hand, in my fingers, and while I'm waiting for the deer, when I have the bow off at the ready. So at least my fingers are warm instead of frigid cold.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and Jerry, what we can do, the last thing too, is if you shoot me an email, I'm just kevin@firstlite.com. We can kind of prescribe you a kit based on where you're hunting and what you got going on. As far as temperatures too, we got a lot of guys willing to do that. So just a little side note there.
Yeah, I've got like I said, the kids coming in too.
Yep.
And I've been ran out of the stands just from being cold.
Of course.
So that could also obviously be a factor that would ruin the hunts for them. So looking a little bit of multiple to there. So thank you.
So mine's maybe 2 parts. One, I guess, what are some of the things, once you narrow down an area on a property that you're willing to put your stand at or to position yourself at, what are some of the things that you're looking for to position the stand or a blind or whatever, in terms of maybe where the deer are coming from? And I guess the second part to that would be, I'm pretty tall and lanky, so my once I stand up, if I'm up in a stand, it makes quite a bit of motion. I'm a pretty big object up in a tree at 6'5". So I'm curious if you had any tips or tricks for some things to keep in mind when you're setting up your stands to avoid making noise or becoming super noticeable.
Yeah, one thing that I really focus a lot on is staying mobile. So, I mean, even if I'm hunting a spot that is a 1/4 acre yard here, I might hunt all 4 trees on that property, to where, one day I'm hunting this tree, one day I'm hunting the tree that's 5 yards over, one day I'm hunting the tree that's 5 yards over. I'm just trying to constantly keep the deer guessing, instead of them kind of realizing that, hey, sometimes there's a 2-legger that hangs out in that tree, and bad things happen when we walk by them. So I'm always trying to position myself in new areas that will keep the deer guessing and prevent them from getting used to those, one locations. But I also hunt from a saddle, so being mobile is really easy because I literally just need my sticks. I go up, I clip in, and I'm good to go. As far as like all that movement when you're standing up, that's tough. I mean, the key is really, and I found this a long time ago, I would get up in a tree, I'd look around, and then, I'm, being that I hunt from a tree as much as I do, I'm pretty much always working in the tree. So I'm like sending emails, which then leads to Instagram, which then leads to like a deep dive on the Explore page. And next thing you know, like 3 hours have gone by. So it was not unusual for me to be looking down at my phone, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a deer right there, and now I'm pegged. So you really got to kind of, even if you're reading or doing whatever, do a little and then kind of just like do a quick scan. And I think of it as keeping my head on a swivel. But the second that you see deer, stand up. And if you're hunting from a tree stand, get your back against that tree as fast as possible to prevent there from being any type of silhouetting of you in the tree and getting that angle. And then just constantly keep your back against the tree, with your bow kind of ready, as still as you can be, to have them work in. But the last thing you want to do is have to stand up when the deer is at 30, 40, 50 yards or wherever they're going to actually pick up that movement. When they're far enough off, you're able to get away with that movement because their vision's looking at everything around them. They're not going to pick up that single movement that's only 100 yards away or however far away you are. Did I answer your question fully on the first part of it? Because
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's just sometimes I find a spot and I'm like, oh yeah, this is certainly a good area to have a stand or to have a blind.
Yep.
But then it's finding those avenues and things to look for once you're already there and established in the spot.
Yeah, so if you find like the spot that would be like the perfect 5 trails coming together right at that one awesome white oak that's always dropping every year, right around when buck season opens up, I'm looking for a spot that's going to be on the best downwind side, that maybe has the best back cover to it for both my body but also my scent trail for the predominant wind, to prevent me from getting winded. If there's an intersection here and I'm able to get on the side where no deer is going to cross my entry trail or also cut my wind, that's where I would want to put a stand. Your access to an area and then your wind, where that scent trail is going is so important. A lot of guys overlook that, and a lot of guys get busted by deer that they don't even realize busted them because they picked up their scent or picked up their ground scent and just never came in. So when you're looking for that spot to hang your stand in at like the spot, definitely take into account like all those options. And then also, if you can find if you find all of those factors, all those features in a tree that also has like, a holly tree behind it, that's going to be an evergreen, or even if you can get up in a pine tree, and as long as you're not cutting a bunch of branches that are going to drop sap on you, or like a cedar tree, dude, those are phenomenal because they're always green. So you're always going to have that cover helping break you up. The last thing you want to do is get that like perfect spot in September, but come late October when all the leaves fall down, you're sticking out like a sore thumb, because the deer will pick up on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
you kind of touched on the cold weather clothing a little bit earlier, so I want to ask about that. But I would ask if you change your tactics for hunting in snow. I usually early season I'm usually down here near Detroit, and then late near Christmas I go back home up into the UP where they still have snow and they're still getting snow. And so just wondering if your general tactics change and whether your use of how you look at Onyx maps or any of those things change.
Yeah, so my cold weather kit, for me is that Solitude set with a lot of layers underneath of it. If it is like extreme cold, like UP cold, you might want to be looking more towards the Sanctuary set, especially depending on like how your body temperature comfort range is and how you run, whether you run hot or cold.
I'm a little straight like Kevin, so.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that, I personally haven't hunted in the UP, but from what I understand, it's pretty cold. So I would think that Sanctuary set with some layers would be good. When I'm hunting in the snow, one thing that you don't have to worry about is a blood trail in the snow is very visible to neighbors. So I actually will keep like one of those little military shovels that fold up in my truck, and so when I shoot one, I'll follow the blood trail and flip the snow over to try and make it as discreet as possible. For you, that doesn't matter, and that just makes them easier to find. So what I would suggest looking for is stuff that will create, allow the deer to be heating up in those, in wherever they're bedding. So like, let's say it's windy, you might want to find like a little depression where the deer can get out of the wind, and they might be in a big evergreen thicket. They really love those evergreens that when they catch the snow, the leaves and branches will kind of make a little tent almost for them. You can find a lot of deer bedded in those because they have thermal properties where the heat's radiating off of them. It's helping them keep warm. Much like we would want to do if we were caught in a snowstorm outside, we're going to kind of find shelter. They're also going to be bedding very, very, very close to their food source. So I normally won't hunt the mornings when there's a lot of snow. I think the deer will hunker down and kind of wait it out until everything, the sun's gotten a nice chance to heat everything up. And what works great, especially if you're able to throw standing sticks on your back or saddle or whatever, just head out, try to find a southern facing slope where it's going to get more sun exposure, and start looking to cut tracks. And if you find where the deer have been feeding a lot, maybe there's like a holly bush that the berries are very present on, or there's just something with a high stem count that the deer are just feeding on, like briars or whatever, and you see a lot of tracks around there and they're feeding on it, I would figure out which way the wind's coming and set up, because especially if you're on a southern facing slope, those deer are not far away, and they will be back there. They're not going to waste calories looking for a new food source when there's one present. So if you're going to like a traditional UP deer camp, that's what I'd be looking for. And just start on those southern facing slopes and kind of get out and look around, because, as a general rule of thumb, the northern facing slopes will hold deer when it's hot out in the summertime, because that has the most shade. Vice versa, in the wintertime, the southern facing slopes will have the most sun exposure, so the deer can literally lay out in sun and warm up easier that way. And they'll also be tucked in kind of under those cedars or other evergreens where they can have like a thermal property and right by their food.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they're lazy, man. They're just like us. They don't want to die, and they want to eat and sleep and be comfortable.
Right on.
There's just a quick one on arrows. Taylor, what's your go-to for, what do you look for in an arrow? Whether it's from like a gold tip to a full metal jacket, like when you're going from your backyard scenario, and then you're headed out west, maybe longer shots. What do you look for in an arrow in terms of like power, weight?
Yeah, I look for a lot. So I want an arrow that has a really high front of center. I know that there's a lot of back and forth on that. I personally like anywhere from like a 15 to 18% front of center. I like shooting something in the 525 to 550 grain range. I'm a pretty big guy, so I'm like 6'2", 6'3". I have a 31-inch draw length, so I don't have to worry about, getting 550 grains out of something. I like to shoot a micro diameter shaft. I'm really, really, really anal when it comes to building my arrows. So I go through like a pretty meticulous process where I'll take a blank shaft, spin it, I'll figure out which part of the arrow is not spinning true. So being that my arrow is as long as it is and the blank shaft is 32 inches, I really don't have a ton of excess to cut off, like where somebody who might have like a 27-inch arrow. I just built a couple dozen arrows for a buddy of mine. He has a 26-inch draw length. I got to cut like half the arrow off. It was awesome. Every single one of those arrows spins so true, it's not even funny. For me, I have to be more picky. So what I'll do is I'll spin those blanks. I'll figure out which side is wobbling. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's just one. But I'll cut from whatever side is wobbly. So that's called cutting the worst out. I'll cut the worst out. Then I will square both sides of it, both the knock end and the front end. A lot of guys will square one side, but they won't square the knock end, which has never made sense to me. You always want everything as square as possible, especially if you're going to take the time to do it. And then we'll take a little jag from a 22 or a .177 air rifle, depending on the size of the shaft inside. I'll clean out where I'm going to put my adhesive, and then I use the Day 6 arrows, so they have a insert-outsert kind of collar on them. And here, I have one right here. Where those went. So I put some epoxy on them, put them in, and then I'll spin them before the epoxy sets. And if they don't spin perfectly true, I'll kind of twist it about a quarter of a turn until it does spin true. But I won't hunt with an arrow that doesn't spin absolutely perfectly true. And then I'll do a little bit of knock tuning and then be good to go. So I'm looking for the straightest arrow, 550 grains, and then my current arrow setup's right around 18.5 FOC. It flies great. So I'm shooting 68 pounds with 550 grain arrow. Those are right around 268 feet per second. So the momentum and kinetic energy from those are just insane. So yeah, I would suggest, whenever you're building an arrow, I suggest building your own. It's a pain in the ass, but you're just not, it's like tuning your bow. It's highly unlikely that you're going to find an archery shop that's going to take the time to do what you want done. They just can't take the time to go through that process because they can't make $20 for spending a full day building arrows or tuning a bow. But it's worth it in the long run, especially if you're shooting a fixed blade head at 40 yards, 50 yards at something. So.
Awesome. Great question. Well, guys, that takes us to the end of the hour. Really appreciate you guys spending a little bit of time with us tonight. If you have any other questions, you can find Taylor at Hunt Urban on Instagram. I'm at Kevin Harlander, and you can shoot us your questions there or shoot us an email. I put my email in the chat there. It's just Kevin at First Lite. Taylor, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, hit me up on Instagram, Urban Bowman or Hunt Urban. And just if you have any questions that we didn't answer, feel free to shoot me a DM. I'm more than happy to help any way I can. Anybody out there, just, you know.